To become an agent in India, what is required? Nothing.
There's been an unusual spike of visa refusals, and this is not across the bad agents or the not so good agents. It's across the industry, across the market.
Students who are getting rejections may be genuine students, but they are ill-prepared students.
Why would I put $40,000 in Go Mist and not utilize it by investing to US stocks or any financial instrument?
I think that should be more like you either have the money to study in Australia or you don't.
In Australian universities, if you have 3 tick marks, academics, you're in.
So, welcome to Australia Decoded, a series co-created with JCU University Brisbane and University Living student housing platform to help you student and understand what really happening in the study abroad ecosystem in Australia. If you find this useful, do subscribe and share it with anyone who might benefit, students, parents, counselor or colleagues. Today's episode is all things Australia student visa. The goal is simple, to make visa rules and policy changes easier to understand for students, parents and the ecosystem, and to put them in the right context for 2026 and beyond. I'm joined by my co-host Shrikant Desshmukh, International Marketing Director at James Cook University, Brisbane, and we have two new guests joining from one is in Australia down under and the other one I just got to know she's in Sri Lanka. So both of you, first of all, thank you for taking out time. And Sonya Singh is from SIEC and John Crutchley is from Go Mist. And as I always do, rather than me introducing you, I can't do justice to the work you have been doing. So would love Sonya to go ahead and introduce herself and then probably we'll follow by John.
Well, I'm Sonya Singh, Managing Director and founder of SIEC Education Private Limited, a company that has been recruiting international students globally for the last 30 years. And we started the company with Australia as our core market, which it still remains very strong with us. It's actually our strongest market. And we've got about 30 branches across the subcontinent, and we've got a team of about 200 experienced career advisors who we work with. Let's try to unfold what the next 2 years look like.
We'll come on that kind of challenging part. John, Go Mist. What is mystery about Go Mist?
Thank you for inviting me on the this particular podcast. Delighted to be part of it. Look, my background is financial services, man and boy, which is many years now. In the last probably 15 years, I've specialised in the international remittance space and everyday banking space. Ran ANZ's retail operation overseas for 6 years, and then had the great privilege of being one of the founders of a new challenger bank here in Australia and building that bank out. Now, the lessons that I learned there is that we were looking at mainly focusing on the international student market and their everyday money. So not necessarily the tuition payments, obviously that's a well-trodden path with some big organisations. We've always wanted to look at how do we help students solve for their everyday money. And make sure that it's more safely and securely brought to the country and giving them a much better a platform to be able to survive when they're in Australia. And that's what we built. Now that changed, slight pivot last year when the government increased the requirement to $29,710 for the visa application. We decided to build a solution that's here in Australia to enable students and parents and sponsors to be able to have those funds in the country while they're applying for their visa and then when they live here. So we launched that last year, albeit that I've been in the sector for many years. We launched that last year. We're having some great success with that now, and it fits very nicely in terms of some of the challenges that we will address today, I think, in terms of that financial verification and also, the rules around visa applications.
Interesting. We'll go deep, and finance and compliances are going hand to hand. So we'll definitely, go deep. Shrikant, we already been doing lots of stuff and lots of our audience are common audience now and most of them knows you, but still, every day we are changing, evolving. So what is the new addition from last episode you have added to your introduction, if any?
To my introduction, it changes every day, Saurabh, and to be honest, that's not because I'm adding skills every day, but it's because DHA is showing a different sort of profile and different sort of expectation, setting a different expectation from the education providers, from agents, and that's keeping us on the toes. So really, thank you, Saurabh, for the introduction. And firstly, just want to warmly welcome our guest today, Sonya Singh, very experienced person from the industry, someone I know for the last 20 years, and John Crutchley. We've only known each other for a short period of time, but someone I think will be a key person going forward. So my first question really is for Sonya, and that is, lots been happening in Australia, and you mentioned last 2 years have been a significant change to how things have been moving forward in the visa space. So I want to ask you, what has pushed Australia to tighten the student visa rules in the last couple of years, and what's your view on that?
Well, to be honest, I think this was a story waiting to happen. Because of a very unprecedented, uncontrolled growth post-COVID. And it had a lot to do with the demand supply because of the borders being closed and then everything loosening up. So that was part one of the story. So the volumes were high. And it was highly driven by post-study work rights, migration outcomes, rather than a genuine student wanting to study and get a degree. So the visa policies at that time were being used as a backdoor entry to be able to live and stay in Australia, and use the migration policy and the point system in order to be facilitated to do that. And the other problem also that aggravated it was the high costs that were associated with studying at good universities compared to the higher education private providers, where a student who could transfer into a cheaper bachelor's or a master's would get the same migration outcomes and the same post-study work rights as a group of 8 university. So initial recruitment, student retention, student outcomes. I think all these three had to be re-looked at, reconsidered for this to be a sustainable market and to be a sustainable effort in order to recruit genuine students. So I think these were the causes that led Australia to tighten the regulations.
Right. Good points there. And, we've seen in the last so many years, there have been policy changes, there's been revisions in, we've had SVP, we've had SSVF, now SSVF has had so many different versions. Now, is it that the high volume from certain regions is accelerating this change? When we speak of North India or we speak of Africa, some parts of Africa, are risk markets driving this change? Because that's the perception that the government seems to have and a lot of industry stakeholders seem to have because of the way policies have been implemented. So do you think that that's inevitable with the kind of risk we are operating with, or you have a different view on that?
I think definitely these markets, because look, risk is always relative. The markets that give you volume will give you larger risk. The markets that are small will give you smaller risks. To give an example, if you've got 100 students going from a particular country, the risk is much smaller. The largest markets that all the countries recruit from are India and later on Africa. So I don't think risk is driving so much that the students are posing a risk what I think is that Australia is recalibrating what they actually want, what kind of student they want, and it does not matter which part of the country the student comes from. So that's one part of the story. So they want genuine students. They're not shutting doors to genuine students, But the second part of the story is the kind of agents that the universities are engaging with. The risk is not always centered on a market. The risk is also centered on people who are promoting and marketing Australia. And if the agencies are not screened, controlled, and it becomes a game of greed, then the government has to step in to look at the university engagement with the agencies as well. The third factor also is the greed of institutions. When you are renewing contracts or signing agents just based on volumes, you are sending a trigger into the market that if the volumes are low, your contracts will not be renewed. No one's looking at quality recruitment. No one, and because now retentions become such a big issue that the universities are forced to look at the kind of agencies they engage with. So that's part 3 of the story. Post-COVID, the aggregators coming into the business with nameless, faceless sub-agents who sign on to their platforms. That agent could be, a rickshaw puller. You don't know. But because he's got some inroads into these villages or into these places, even if they get one student out and they get commission for one student, that could be 6 months to 1 year of their total income. So I don't think the policies are driven by so much by the risk of countries, but more by this very, very loose-ended policies that the universities and the government had to allow anyone to enter Australia so long as they had the money and the English. And I think this is here to stay. And it will bring in more sustained recruitment, but it's not going to shut doors for India or Africa, not for genuine students.
So I'm so sorry, I couldn't stop myself. So because the prima facie I'm an aggregator. Of course, I'm not into admission, I'm not into recruitment. I'm a different kind of platform, which is information. But there's always, and we work with lots of aggregators, and we work with lots of traditional, agents or consultants, as to say it. So why there's always this step between aggregators and traditional agents? Can't they coexist? One. Second, you mentioned that, of course, firstly, as for me, because I'm working in so many other regions, Australia universities are one of the most, they have one of the most regulated or concentrated way of working with agents, compared to at least in UK or in other part of the world, even Ireland, right? Still, why there is not control of the agents, quality recruitment? It's what I'm missing. I mean, again, you guys are, Shrikant been representing Australia for 20 years. You've been doing it for 40 years. For me, I'm still 10-year young, lad who like to understand Australia more deeper. So why this happening?
Okay, 2 parts of the question. To become an agent in India, what is required? I'm just asking a question.
Probably some licenses, some office.
Nothing. Nothing. If you want to become a sub-agent, all you've got to do is be alive. That's it. No qualification is checked. No exposure is checked. Why do you think I gave an example of a rickshaw puller? So somebody sitting in a little place can actually sign up to a platform and become a sub-agent without any. So this business has the lowest entry point of any entrepreneur in the world, right? So that's one part of the scenario. Then you facilitate your platform and you send your marketing executives out there, sign up everyone. So you have a list of 3,000, 3,500 sub-agents. Who's controlling those 3,500 sub-agents and what are they actually saying to the student? Is there any control? Is it possible to control?
But then why universities are working with them?
Well, to be honest, there are not many Australian universities that are working with large aggregators who are not taking responsibility for where the students are recruiting from. But having said that, Australia is not about just universities. There are private providers in Australia who are into higher education. There are agencies who own colleges in Australia. So if you remember, I said greed. When you bring in the private sector with the same facilitation to provide higher education, what will they do? They are in it for the short term. They want to make money because the visas are open, because you're allowed to have sub-agents. They'll sign up with anyone and everyone. So the issue is much deeper. So I have nothing personal against aggregators. I mean, if you are an aggregator and you know every sub-agent that you sign up, and you've got a screening process for every sub-agent that you sign up, and then you have a screening process and responsibility for every visa that you apply that comes through the sub-agent, that's fine. It's like working virtually through different branches. But if you're going to make it so loose-ended, then there is a problem. So what has happened now? And if you see in the last, as soon as India went to assessment level 2, who came on camera? What kind of agents came on camera to say Australia is open, no IELTS required, no money required, nothing required? And they were saying apply through group of 8. So who is using the assessment level 2, assessment level 1, loose-ended scenario to their benefit? None of the large agencies or the traditional agencies came up to actually take advantage.
I want to ask you a question, perhaps a curveball for you, Sonya. And you've opened a can of worms with Saurabh has opened a can of worms talking about aggregators and traditional agents. And I'm not in favor of necessarily in favor of.
Not fine. You're putting me on a spot, but I'm all I'm all about all the partners because I work with
Fair
them.
enough.
But
Fair enough, Saurabh. And my question really is, and again, not saying it from having a prejudice with traditional agents or aggregators, but one question: aggregators are working with 2,500 agents across the world or across the country, whatever the case. And traditional agents, now as a university for the last 20 years, I've been working with traditional agents, and the ones who are doing reasonable volume actually work with sub-agents as well. And I think the only difference between aggregators and traditional agents from that perspective is the scale of sub-agents. And how closely you monitor them, I guess, I don't know, I don't want to, make this claim here on the call that traditional agents also do not have a system of monitoring sub-agents. But how do you define that? How do you differentiate that?
Okay.
When both are working with sub-agents?
Okay, so I'll give you a difference between the two of them. Traditional agents who have been working with Australia specifically are very, very conscious of their relationships and their contracts. Traditional agencies over the last 30 years have built relationships. Like you said, you know me for 20 years. If I was to send you any students, my team and I would be totally responsible to look at the quality and the visa acceptance rate, because I do not want to spoil my relationship with Shrikant or with the university. So we are invested in those relationships. And this business is about relationships. It's not about data-driven numbers. Whereas if I have sub-agents, and I don't deny that we all have sub-agents, but we have a system in place, a compliance system in place, which says, fine, the sub-agent has referred a student, but there is an interview process in place. There is a financial compliance in place. The student is told categorically that SIEC will be contacting you, that we are just facilitators. They'll be contacting you directly to find out your GS and your GTE requirement. If the sub-agent says, yes, I'm fine with it, we accept the student because even they want commission and we've got to share commission. If the sub-agent refuses to put the student in front of us, we deny. We say we do not want to work with such a student. Now that is transparency. End-to-end transparency. So the source can be, so the way traditional agencies look at sub-agencies, that they are our marketing tools, they are in regions where we are not present. and they refer students to us, but then it is our responsibility to screen the student and give the student genuine information for their further studies. Because traditionally, Shrikant, agencies like us had no social media. Our businesses grew through word of mouth. Our businesses grew through references and through success stories. And we still operate like that. Whereas if you look at the large platforms, their success depends on data. How much are they able to showcase to their shareholders? The number, and that is why most of the aggregators focus on applications. I was surprised to know, because we've started recently working with UK universities, I was surprised to know that in UK you actually have to send 150 applications to convert 10 students. And I said, how do you manage it? And they said, we are used to managing volumes because we work with aggregators who send us huge volumes, where 90% applications would be rejected. So you see the difference between how Australia functions and how the rest of the world functions? And so similarly, there's a difference between traditional agencies working with sub-agents and aggregators who are just using platforms to sign up sub-agents and students. I hope that answers your question,
It does. So I think what you're saying essentially is there are two parts. One is the scale at which aggregators are not managing their sub-agents, and the other part is that there is a process, there's a compliance process when it comes to traditional agents managing their sub-agents. Now, of course, as a university, and again, I'm probably playing devil's avocado here when I'm talking about aggregators, but from a university perspective, our biggest challenge and concern is that as a traditional agency, SIEC can give us 10, 15, 20 students with X number of offices. An aggregator having 2,500 agents, sub-agents under their belt, is still recruiting 5, 6, 7 students. So with the scale that they're operating with, it is not trickling down to the university. So those numbers are not reflected at the university enrollment figures. I think you're right, they may be focusing on the applications and not so much on the conversions. So I guess that's a sort of a brownie point one for traditional agents so far. But I just want to get John's view on this, and that's because, we don't want to make it one-sided, so we'll get a third-party view. John, you're working with, you in this industry for a while. What is your view on the aggregator versus traditional agents debate or discussion that's been happening of late?
Look, and apologies for just disappeared for a little while. But with regard to the aggregators, I've always found that interesting. Like my background in financial services has tended to have the aggregator model across many different things. For example, I've worked in the home loan sector for a number of years, and there will be aggregator tools that will pull together a home loan offering based on various variables. I want to borrow X amount over so many years, and this is my income, and etc. And it will pull together a series of offers there. But like what Sonya was saying, I probably saw me nodding away in the background, is that it felt to me that the concept that some of the aggregators probably was a good one, in that it was going, okay, we can aggregate some services for submission of applications into one form that would go out to then multiple universities that would fit certain criteria. But what appeared to be happening to me in the reality is that there were just a lot of these applications being fired in and just creating this significant amount of administrative tasks for everybody involved. And it's one of the challenges that I sort of see as we look at the financial element of this, and you go, okay, so the government say we're going to push down the requirement to the institution that you need to have these levels of evidence, whether it be academic, genuine student, financial, etc. Then that then goes down to the agent community, and they say you need to provide us with this level of evidence, and then that then goes down to the student, and sponsor parents, you need to provide us this level of. And it seems to then go all the way back up the line through to the government. And the aggregators, to me, it doesn't work in that basis. Like the traditional agents that we've been very very focused and very deliberate in our business as we've rolled out, with only working with certain agents that have the setup like SIEC and Ravi and of that ilk, rather than saying, okay, we want to go to I don't even think Adventus are still around, are they now? I think they've been bought out somewhere. Apply board and all these sort of things. I just felt that didn't work, and I think Sonya said this one thing right at the start of the conversation as well, is like post-COVID, there was just this plethora of applications and attempts to sort of onboard and go study overseas again, and the quality then appeared to be, from certain areas on that aggregator side, pretty low, and the conversions were probably even lower than 1 in 10 or whatever it might be. One thing Sonya also said there, which I agree, is that the barrier to and the bar to entry is very low. And it felt to me, or it feels to me as maybe an outsider looking in, that a lot of the sub-agents might work with several other sort of master agents or aggregators. And this just, even that creates confusion and difficulties, and whether that's just because they pay a better commission for the, and I think that some of the controls over the sector probably need to be increased a little bit, and just, you know, and maybe it's that barrier to entry or the sort of your ongoing compliance that you have to do. I'm not massive on wanting compliance. Like, my sector's hugely regulated financial. I'm not asking for that. I think that should be the case. But it does also filter down into some of the things that I think are challenges, you know, sort of, and maybe we'll touch on these a little bit more, but certain things are very binary, as Sonya alluded to there. You know, you have to have the academics, you have to have the genuine student statement, you have to pay tuition fees, you have to pay for OSHC because you don't qualify for Medicare. And then the bit that we look at, this one big grey area that you have to evidence $30,000, is so grey and so vastly complicated that it also then allows, as Sonya also said there, is sort of like, oh, we're not going to submit financials, or we're not going to submit this, and I think by allowing that to happen, it just then creates a whole load of mess again. And one of the words that's stuck with me from your first question, Shrikant, was I felt there was an inevitability that if we look at the India market, it was going to go back to a 3. It just felt inevitable to me that, like, it got given an opportunity to go to a 2, and then things went a little bit mad and wild again, and then it was like, well, it's going to be a 3, and it just. But the other bit to that is, it just shows this inconsistency, this yo-yo scenario of rules and visa rules and regulate, and what do you do and what you don't do, and there's so many different stakeholders in it that then creates a whole load of challenges for the university, and what's their evidence levels and what's their rules. You know, so I sometimes look at my sector, financial services, thinking, blimey, this is a complicated sector and whatever. But then I look at some of the things that are going on in the education sector, and I'm like going, oh wow, you completely beat us on that. It was, but the interesting thing is that, you know, trying to bring all of these together. So, you know, I'm trying to disrupt a financial sector that's in the education sector, that's having battles with the government sector, and you know, that is challenging in itself. So I think, I'm hoping that, you know, within the next 6 to 12 months, it can calm a little bit, and we can have some sort of, you know, the industry's sort of getting to that point where we go, okay, well, we understand what that is. And I think that, and again, probably touch on it a little bit, I think more of it should be a little bit more binary, particularly the bit that we look at. I think that should be more like, you either have the money to study in Australia or you don't, not this big grey area that we'll evidence it, and it's offshore and it's here and it's there, and who's got genuine access to that. And I think that's way too open and susceptible to fraud that we've seen at all different levels, to manufacturing documents and manufacturing. And the minute you allow that to happen, it happens on everything, every document. I've seen something that sort of, I think you touched on the group of 8 on you at the top of the call, where wasn't there something around, there was fraudulent passport documents being submitted to a group of 8 universities to get sort of approvals there, and I'm like, that to me just seems wild. But if it's going on at that level, there's going to be challenges across all different things. And then you look at country A, country B, country C, country D. There's so many different levels and facets and fragmented approach to this, that I think that good agents, which is the one that we pride ourselves at, who we work with, they've got these processes and systems. And the one, I'll finish with the last word on that one, and Sonya said about relationships. It's vitally important. Relationships is word of mouth, going to the right agent and having that relationship and the trust in there, because you as the universities and then you'll know who to trust. It wouldn't take long for you to write down, and we'd all write down the same names. Who are the key agents that we trust? That we're happy to work with, trust that they're going to be providing the right quality of student. And like I say, those are my sort of high level thoughts on some of these challenges that were happening on the tightening side of it at the moment. Is that, like I say, the one word that keeps jumping out to me is inevitability. It just felt inevitable that we were going to lose some of the 1 to a 3 or a 2 to a 3 again, because of some of the practices that happened, and we probably know as well why those things happened as well.
So John, Shrikant, allow me. Thanks for saving it to make it a aggregator versus traditional debate. And
Yeah, sure.
before we or probably you guys frame that all the aggregators are alligators, and probably we can have a discussion wherein we should have one aggregator, one traditional. Shrikant, that's probably a good episode to work on. But John, and also another thing I can relate with, like accommodation. I mean, I thought it's very simple. Then I realized, no, it's not private, it's not public. There's university and there's government we need to talk about. And on the face value, it
Yeah.
seems so simple. Like accommodation should be so simple. But then still in last 15 years, I'm still thinking why government is not putting money and why private investors are not coming in Australia to build more accommodation. But again, that's a different episode. So John,
Sure.
you mentioned about manufacturing degrees, which move to compliance, and then to talk about GS, EL3 and SSVF. Lots of our audience is also probably students who are looking to go abroad, parents who are still discovering whether to Australia, to UK, to US.
Yeah.
You want to talk about what is GS, what is EL3, and what is this new term SSVF?
Yeah, look, I think this probably comes down to, from our perspective, a very simple requirement that we look at, and I'll give you an example that we've been working on with one particular university at the moment. Is that their policy doesn't allow them to recruit from certain regions because it's way too rigid. For example, they say we need to evidence 6 to 12 months of bank statements from a parent from this particular country, where this particular country that we were looking at, that's just not the way of the world. It's just the parents have that money, but they don't have it in that banking system there. So to have a simplistic application that would go in, what we're tending to find from a lot of the universities that we're talking to is they're going, look, we need to still provide the evidence. We want to still see what the evidence is, whether it be financial, academic, etc. I often use this phrase with regard to some of the EL3 and the requirements, and obviously the financial requirements, because that's the bit that we deal with, is that if a student doesn't have the funds to pay the tuition or the living expenses in this country, then that doesn't not necessarily mean they're not a genuine student. They are very much a genuine student, but it might not be this particular country that they can actually study in. We got approached, and I'll give you the country in particular. It was African country, Zimbabwe and Kenya, and holding funds in their bank accounts there is just not a done thing. But the parents have plenty of money, and it's in different forms, and they were able to evidence that they got this level of funds. So we were able to work with this particular university and said, okay, well, look, we can evidence to you that the funds are genuine. There's no fraud involved with this. We can evidence that the serviceability of their study is sufficient, and we can evidence that the funds are real. But the critical piece that we then came in is going, okay, the risk factor is if the funds are left overseas, there is no stakeholder in this process that insists that the funds then come to the country. Whereas we provided this solution where the funds then came in, and we looked at the different stakeholders. If I start with the accommodation one that you were talking about there, we're able to evidence that we've got accommodation for 12 months for the student to pay their rent every month for the next 12 months. We looked at the institutions and said, okay, what's one of your challenges? Retention. We don't know whether students have got money for semester 2, semester 3 payments or whatever. The madness of this, our average balance of a student's about $40,000, 29 living, 10, 15 for tuition payments. So that helped that side of it. We're able to work with the agents to say, look, our technology can prove that this is either fraudulent or we've got incredible technology now that can say, is it a fake document? Is it fraudulent? Has it been tampered with? All these sort of things to speed that whole process up and go, funds are genuine. And then ultimately, the government's benefiting that we go in, genuine money, genuine student, genuinely got access to the funds. Those 4 words kept repeating to me all the time, genuine access to funds. We're able to evidence that as well because the money's sat here in a meets legislation, financial institution, and drawn down each month for the benefit. Sonya will know things like GIC in Canada, blocked accounts in Germany. We took similar ethos of that solution and evolved it to be a much more flexibility in that as well. But what we've then seen is going, okay, as these evidence levels keep changing like that, we're going, okay, well, almost make it become binary. You know, like you have to pay your tuition, as I said earlier, you have to pay your OSHC. Then make it binary, in my humble opinion, to make it binary that other piece, you have to show that you've got genuine access, or you have to bring that genuine access to Australia at some point in the process, so you can go, I've got my tuition, I've got my living expenses, I've got my OSHC, I meet all the criteria as a genuine student. And then the evidence level things then become less of a risk, become less up and down, because you go, okay, all these things are set in stone that what you have to do to be in Australia to study for at least a year or 2 years, if that makes sense.
That's good feedback, and I've got maybe a couple of points here to make, and I guess a question as well for Sonya,
Sure.
As well as one. Now, Sonya, you've spoken about compliance, how you're managing your sub-agents with a degree of compliance and monitoring, and all of those areas of sort of screening. And John, you've just mentioned about your product at MIST, which is essentially like a proof of funds account where you've proved that there is genuine access to funds. Now, this is all great in theory and practice because you both are doing that. But when we look at the visa refusals, and this is where things start to change significantly and dramatically, is in the last 2 weeks following the assessment level changes for global markets, not just South Asia, there's been an unusual spike of visa refusals, and this is not across the bad agents or the not so good agents. It's across the industry, across the market. So how much of these changes and these improvements that we are making as an education provider, as an agency, as a third party sort of finance company, how much of these changes are actually impacting the visa outcome positively? To just turn that around a little bit, John, I'll ask you, do you guarantee a visa if someone uses your product for proof of fund? Difficult question to answer, right? So I guess how much of these positive changes and extra screening is really helping the industry, students, and everyone?
Yep, great question. Look, for obvious reasons, we can't guarantee that somebody gets a visa if they use our particular product, because there's multiple reasons why visas can be declined. If I was to say the base stats that we have at the moment is that we've done several $1 million through the fund of students using our product to apply for their visa. We've had visas approved, visas declined. The visa approvals, though, the visas declined. We've not had a visa decline for financial reasons. Not one. every visa that's used our product that's been approved generally has been approved. If a visa's been declined that's used our product as well, there's a few, a small handful, it's because their genuine statements and their genuine reasons for study in Australia were not deemed to be meeting the requirements of the DHA. So that's why they were declined. We just returned funds.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you on that point there, John. Sorry.
Sure.
So when the visa refusals are issued, they are quite generic in nature, and they're never sort of detailed as to why the visa has been refused. So there's sort of in my view, there's no way to find out why the visa has been refused. We've seen rarely where they've gone down to a level where they've said it's refused because of fraudulent documents or some other fraudulent academic document or whatever. So how do we establish that doing proper financial checks or using a proof of funds account would mitigate that risk substantially? I mean, as a provider, that's a key question for me. Like, using your product, is it really going to solve the problem?
Yeah, look, so all I can say is that with the cases that we've seen that have been refused, and like I say, there's only been a few today because we're still early in that process. We saw I think there's three in particular. They were linked to a certain region, and also their ties to home country were not evidence as sufficient in terms of the documentation that we've seen from the refusal of the visa. We've actually had a couple of applications that missed in the visa documentation because they asked for some more information. The two in particular, one came back and said the student had evidenced in our fund in their name X amount, and they said that there was a shortfall of maybe 5,000 or 6,000 in terms of where the government, the DHA, then calculated the amount of funds that were required. So the parents just topped that up, and the visa was approved. And then we had a second one, which was where they wrote to us and said, they wrote to the agent and the student, and it was forwarded to us. They needed some evidence of where funds would sit to make sure it met financial institution regulation, which we provided. And a week, 10 days later, the visa was approved. So those were those positive ones where we've had engagement. Like I say, the only visas that we've seen were declined were from a certain region, which I won't name the country. And it was for ties to home country that they hadn't sufficiently. And there was one further one, which was it actually stated that they didn't believe the degree that they were doing was sufficient to give them enhanced career prospects because they'd already done a similar level of degree in their home country. So that's all I can say on that, because that's just been my experience on that. But look, we are in active conversations with the Department of Home Affairs. I won't name the gentleman that we're talking to, but we've had a lot of correspondence with them. We've provided them with legal evidence that we meet legislation. I think the key, Shrikant, there as well for ourselves is that because we do all the financial verification of the documents and we are able to evidence at a very deep level whether there's been any fraudulent activity on it, the ultimate difference from money sitting overseas, however it's been evidenced, the ultimate difference that gives, I believe, the government and the sector strength that they say, does that student have genuine access to the funds, is that the money that is sent to us ultimately then gone through a bank transaction, so it's legitimised through the banking system, and also it's in the student's name. There's no parents' joint account. There's no sponsor. It can only be in the student's name, and it's only the student who has access to those funds, and it's drawn down to start with on a monthly basis. So that's why we believe that is a stronger proposition for institutions and the sector than if the money then evidenced and it remains offshore. Because we meet with all sorts of universities and they say to us one of their biggest challenges is attrition. The student arrives 3 months later, 6 months later, they move on. We don't retain them for semester 2 or year 2.
Yeah. That's right.
Let's bring Sonya in on this.
Yeah, I want to ask one more question, Sonia, before you answer, provide feedback. My question is, are you recommending MIST? Pretend that John's not here. Are you recommending MIST to your students? And do you think it's a valuable service?
To be honest, Shrikant, at this moment, we are not doing it because obviously we are an agency that treads with caution. And we'd like to see a few more universities accepting MIST or DHA letters accepting MIST. So we've got nothing against John, but being the person and the agency that sits in the middle, we do not want to be caught out with with any issues that happens with a new product or a new business or a new service. And when we recommend something, the buck does not stop with MIST, it stops with us. If something goes wrong, we tend to lose not one student, but the entire chain. And the nature of the business is such that the student feels that maybe we are getting paid by MIST a certain amount of money that we recommended them, and that is why their visas kind of has declined. So we are waiting and watching, and not started it yet. Not to say, but I think what they're offering, and if the Australian government is really listening, we need something like MIST desperately to stop attrition, to actually have, because look, it's not just the student's intention may be bad, but life happens, Shrikant. So my business could be flourishing and I may have money now, but once my child goes abroad to study, 6 months, 1 year down the line, if I have no money or my business tanks, there's no guarantee that the child will be able to get money. And so if you have something like MIST, the money is there. It has nothing to do with the fluctuations of a particular family or business. And I think so it protects the student in a lot of ways. And so I think it's a great product and a great
Uh,
service.
I would like to, barge in here, So first of all, yes, totally again, I validate. It took us some years to, convince Sonia and the team to work with University 11, and I believe they're happy, partners, you know. But someone, Sonia, what you mentioned, someone who believe that I understand some bit of personal finance, why would I put $40,000 in Go Mist and not utilize is by investing to US stocks or any financial instrument? I mean, $40,000, and am I getting interest? And if I'm getting interest, that interest is beating inflation? Definitely not. Why will I put 40,000, $50,000 into an account for Go Mist?
Great question,
But so,
so
but
Lovely questions.
Saurabh, but
Go on, sorry, I
Saurabh,
was
no
just about to
one's
say, Sonia, I was just about to say, sorry, I'll let you answer and I'll answer my bit. Go on.
so basically, Saurabh, no one's forcing anyone to put the money into MIST. It's an option. So if I want to choose, if I want to prove funds through keeping money in my account and I'm very comfortable, I mean, no one's forcing the student to do it. Secondly, there are parents, specifically in India, who live outside India for taxation purposes, right? And you get no interest on your money if you've got your money overseas into another account. It's minimal. I mean, Australia at this point of time just gives, I think Srikant can, endorse it. 1% maybe if you put it in a fixed deposit, maybe not even that. So these parents have the flexibility to transfer money from an offshore account into an offshore account for their children. It's like buying a house for their kids. Now you'd say, why don't I pay rent and why do I need to spend 100,000? It may not appreciate, but it gives you security that yes, this money is secure and it is gone from an account, which is, so I think it is a personal choice that the parents, but to have a choice is important. So
And
that's my point.
to add to that, look, and Sonia, thank you for that. That was one of the best endorsements of the business, and it came from somebody else, not me. Just a couple of bits to put on that. The reason why Sonia's absolutely right. One thing we've got to build into this process is trust, right? People need to trust that we are who we say we are, that we're able to evidence that the product is real one and works. And look, I'll use some names if that's okay. Look, one thing I'll take my hat off to, very big, is Ravi Locken. He helped us with several first clients. He believed in this. He's used GIC and blocked accounts, and he said, look, he almost used the same words as you, Sonya. This is something that is needed, right? And he was very comfortable. We showed him all the evidence that everything was cool. He was happy to work with us on that. La Trobe University, when they saw that this was a big thing for them with regard to the documentation that they gather and the challenges they have around admissions and those documents of proving that they're real, and also the policy, as Sonya just mentioned there, parents living overseas. And I'll give you an example to Saurabh, to back up what question you've just said there. I was with La Trobe in Kenya, and one of the agents introduced me to the parents. And the parents said to me, what interest do you pay? And I think at the time we were paying 3% on the fund, right? So we've got a fund that pays the money into, and the mom was like, oh, we won't do that because we can get 5% on our money offshore, whatever. And the agent said to me, you need to be strong with the parents, because the dad wants to do this, the mom didn't want to do this. And I said to them fairly bluntly, I said, do you know one stakeholder in this who doesn't care a jot how much interest that you earn on your money? They don't care whether you earn 1% or 50% on your money. That's the Department of Home Affairs. All they care is that daughter of yours has got $29,710 to live off. Now, you can take the risk. They've got money offshore, they've got money in different accounts, they've got some in US dollars. You can take the risk. You can submit your application. Of course, you have that choice, and say, I'm going to leave the money here because I'm going to earn 5%, as opposed to I'm going to put it in the missed account and earn 3%. And the government could look at that and go, which is the one that we're more confident with genuine access to the funds for the student, not the parent. And our account in the student's name gives more assurance that they will have genuine access to that money than $30,000 overseas. Now, this all falls down into, it's expensive to study overseas in the big four countries, right? It's just expensive. And I look at it from a point of view saying, look, we will pay you some interest, you will earn some interest on your $30,000. You have to pay the tuition. All these are they're part of the process of expense to study in Australia or UK or Canada, whatever it might be. That's just what it is. If you want to fight over 1% here or 2% there on that, then there is a chance that it won't be approved. Look, it might be. I get it. There is that choice, as Sonya said. There is that choice.
It won't be a personal too. We can talk about we can have a different episode on this, and probably I won't charge for counseling. Probably, and I'm sure you must have thought about investing into different financial instruments, but no. I mean, as a parent, say I have a 5-year daughter, right? So I'm thinking from her point of view. One way that I'll save for her, but even the inflation is real. If I'm getting even 3%, in India inflation is 6%, across it's 8 to 10%. So in a way that money is eating out. But yes, but the purpose of this go mist and block account is not to earn interest. So totally with you on that. And then probably another episode to discuss on how to invest money and still be compliant and ensure that your student get a visa. Back to you, Shrikant. And probably I guess I interrupted. Sonia was trying to make some point.
No, I was going to talk about Shrikant's second question about visa rejections. Shrikant, the basic fact is that the students who are getting rejections may be genuine students, but they are ill-prepared students. Because students have always, projected themselves, or the career advisors or the counselors have always projected a student in order to get visa outcomes. A student has never projected himself genuinely, ever.
Can I ask you, for the audience, what is genuine student?
Okay, so how would a student choose his program if he was to study in a university in India? Let me put it like that. They'd look at the course that they want to do. They'd look at what universities are offering that course. And they would look at what are the entry requirements for that program. And if they had a gap in their studies or stuff like that, they would address that question.
Valid.
But when they want to study abroad, they go to consultancies. And the consultants tell them, no. You will not get a job in this course, choose this program. You will not get permanent residency in this program, choose another program. So that's part one of the story.
Very agree.
And unfortunately, people who are promoting universities and programs, especially, some in-country reps are great, but some in-country reps have no in-depth knowledge about either the programs or their outcomes or the university that they are representing. Now, these are just salespeople. And I sometimes cringe when we have in-country reps who just joined a university 3 months ago, 6 months ago, want to teach my team, who's been doing it for the last 10 years or 15 years working with the university. They want to come and train them on how to promote the university or programs. So like I said, it is not the student that is at fault. It is how we are projecting, what we are asking the student to project. If you look at the SOPs, with AI, the statement of purposes are so trashy that they give no idea about the real student behind it. Someone else is writing it, someone else is editing it. So that's part one. The other thing is that the students are assuming and the agencies are assuming that, that I'm sitting down here today and suddenly I'll wake up and I'll want to apply to go to Australia in March 2026. We're already in January. That era is over. The DHA wants to see what research, what other applications, what other efforts has the student made in order to choose the program that they are wanting to choose in a country that they are wanting to go into, and what comparisons have they done. And when you read the statement of purposes, you get no idea. And that is why the rejection letters are generic. Because it's very difficult to tell a student that your statement of purpose does not show us. It just says one, general rule, links to home country, not enough funds, or English. So and to be honest, at SIEC, because we look, and also the student choice of programs, very generic programs, which do not lead to employment outcomes, either in India or overseas, lead to rejection. And these are typically, business programs, leadership programs, as they call it. And so there are, and to be honest, at SIEC, even if we get one rejection, we actually go into every detail of that one rejection to see that it's not repeated. And there is a trend and there is a pattern. So could be the course choice, could be the institution choice, could be the statement of purpose that has been projected. It is varied reasons. And I am able to say this because when I look at our applications for the US and the way the US universities assess applications compared to what the Australians assess as an application, there's a huge difference. In US universities, a student has to bend backwards to prove that they've done the research, that they've done all the due diligence and everything, and then they get an offer letter. Whereas in Australian universities, if you have 3 tick marks, academics, money, English, you're in. So
it's university fault, Shrikant.
No, it's not universities. It's an agency's fault as well.
No, that's look. I've got mixed views on that. I think I'm glad you share that feedback as a representative. So, an interesting point, very interesting. Firstly, I think you mentioned about the genuine student, and what I feel is the templated visa refusal system really needs to change. It's become outdated, it's antiquated, and that really needs to change because between academic background, financial background, and the university background, how much of innovation can a student have on their SOP? And the biggest contrast that we've seen is students with very strikingly similar profiles. One student gets refused, another one gets a visa from the exact same city with a very, very similar background. And that kind of makes us question if we have to make any tweaks, what tweaks they must be. So that generic response and template, it puts us all on a back foot, not just as a university, but as an agency. And you made that point before where you're absolutely right. An agent sits, a partner sits in the middle. So the onus is actually on the education agent. So when DHA questions the university and they come to me and they say, Shrikant, you've got 20 visa refusals or whatever, I'm going to say, hang on, let me ring my agent and check. Because that's the tendency that universities have. And we absolutely know it's not your fault necessarily, and it probably is nobody's fault. It just lacks a level of clarity in terms of what is expected. With the advent of AI, I think an SOP would be a minute's job to get done. So I feel that there's a lot of things which need to be sort of reviewed in terms of policy, in terms of approach. But speaking of Australia, and you make a good comparison between US and Australia, and my loyalty will always remain to Australia. I feel like Australia has excellent clarity in terms of the visa refusals are generic, fair enough, but in terms of the whole process of who gets a visa, or if somebody has got a post-study work visa, then that student would never be thrown back from Australia for a random arbitrary reason. That happens in US. People get sort of, pushed back from the...
Shrikant, not getting the, I'm not endorsing the US education system. And I'm not talking about their policies. What I'm talking about here is that Australian universities need to look at the student profile more carefully before issuing an offer letter. Because what is happening now is that students are applying to 10 Australian universities, and we are on the ground. So a typical student goes to an agency like us, and we say, you will limit your applications to 3. He says, fine, I'll go to an aggregator or to another agent and apply to at least 10 more. Now, supposing he's going to get 12 offer letters or 10 offer letters. Should the universities be giving out offer letters so easily to students? What about the universities putting some breaks to actually hold the student there has to be more to an application than just putting in these documents and a student walking around with. So that is my point, that if Australian universities were to lift their game and not keep on giving, because look, every university now has a quota and you've got to meet those requirements and everything. Why not make, and what is desirable from the Indian context is something which is hard to get becomes more valuable.
Yeah.
And Australia is still playing at a Australia still not got that point, that why are we playing in Australia at that level where any and every student can walk in? Why are we not making our selection criteria a bit more selective, looking at the statements, at the students at the initial stage, so that the visa rejection does not happen? That's my point.
I believe chicken and egg. If you think from a student point of view, someone like me who is not biased to any country yet, all the universities need applications, and when the visa rejection is on a higher side, or even the fees are on a higher side, they also want to maximize their chances to fill their quota. probably group 8s or few universities don't struggle, but most of them, it's not only struggle, but also, it's like chicken egg. Like if they become too selective, they also want to do their numbers. If they are doing their numbers, they need to, issue the offer letter, because they don't know. They also play on a probability basis, wherein if they give 100 offer, then probably 10 will get visa. Is it? I'm open. Like, would love to hear from you
Saurabh,
guys.
I can just make a quick point here. And what's happening is really there are two camps in Australia. One is a bunch of universities who would issue an offer as soon as an application is made without due diligence, without GS checks, some without even academic checks. Now, that's the kind of bunch that um, should fall in all sorts of problems. Because, speaking of James Cook University, our system is very clear. If you've got an offer from James Cook University, Brisbane, then it's very clear that you've passed the GS check, you've passed the academic, English, and all the checks except the financials, of course, that you've qualified for an offer and therefore you have an offer letter. So we have a 35 to 37% refusal rate from application to offer, and that sort of explains where we come from. But I think what Sonya is referring to is the other group where the offers are issued like, they're falling like dry leaves from the sky, and then students are basically collecting all these offers and, making the fee payment. So it is because it has become so competitive. I'm not supporting or, having any bias to that approach, but it has become so competitive that even the top universities are inclined to go that way. And I'm not putting G8 in another basket, because I think G8's, I can say this on the call here, G8's on the one who actually stretched things a little bit too far, because there weren't any checks. GS, as they were behaving like GS didn't apply to them, and that's not a great thing. You may be a good ranked university, but you're dealing with a market which has a lot of challenges, and challenges with genuine documents, and so on. So I think it's a pretty messed up circle of, sort of. I would say
And another point, Shrikant, why do universities give some large agencies an exemption from GS?
I was
That
waiting to hear that. I was so waiting to hear that.
that is the
that that
most absurd thing a university would do. I agree with you.
well, yes. So when the universities, so then what do you expect the DHA to do? Because then everything gets clubbed together. Because then, I don't know, maybe the DHA is clubbing institutions or universities who are giving these, and if they look at the large rejection rate or the volumes again, and large volumes, then a visa officer has a bias and keeps on giving rejections one after the other without even looking at a file. So there's no consistency in terms of, fine, the GS is there, but why would you exempt anyone from a GS? At the end of the tunnel is still a student who can leave my agency because I'm stricter and go to an agency that has no GS checks and say, look, I got an offer which you refused and you were making me jump through hoops and loops. Why would I bother coming to you? So there is just no, and that's my point.
That's the point, and this goes back to the one of the earlier points that you were asking, Saurabh, is that sorry, Shrikant, you asked Sonya using MIST and stuff like that. So on one hand, she's going, this is something that's absolutely needed. On the other hand, though, there's so much almost fear and fragmented processes within the sector, whether that be from group, it does get my goat a little bit. You've got this group of 8, then you've got the public university, then you've got this 16 under this simplified visa rule, and then you've got evidence level 1, 2, 3, and then you've got universities that are 1, 2, 3, and countries that are 1, 2, 3, and it's just like how you can keep on top of that regularly in this and within multiple of countries in this fragmented approach. No wonder.
Yeah, that's why that's why
situation
we are
where
doing
people
this
we think this is a great idea.
discussions
Like,
where
I had one person really
we
that
need
said
to make
we
things
don't-
easier.
this
At
is
least
a
we
good
need
idea.
to call things out. Most of us.
But the reality is that to get that message out there, and Saurabh, I think you alluded to with University Living, you've got to tread the boards. You've got to meet the people. You've got to build the relationships. You've got to build that trust in the process. We have to meet with institutions, agents, government, parents. There's a lot of people to talk to this about in the thing that added, particularly when it's such a big amount of money that people are parting with for their child to go and study overseas. So, look, we've turned the corner on that, but I think that this is going to be the year where that's where we will spend a lot of our time in the field, meeting with, going back to India, meeting Sonya again and talking to things, where are the challenges, what sort of information. She's highlighted it though, more universities saying yes, and then you speak to the universities and the universities go, do the DHA say yes? So all these things just take time. Look, we're a patient bunch. And we've got, the hardest bit was building the solution, I think, and addressing the financial side of things. And now, the great thing for me is that we're talking to the individuals in the sector and the government. And I think that, it may be that if the government come back and say, this is an acceptable way to evidence financial capacity, I think that will open up a lot of the doors for the institutions and the agents. Because there will be some, we're not after endorsement, we're not after it being mandated. We just wanted to sort of say this is an acceptable way to evidence financials for their visa or their living expenses. That's all we're after, right? Because we believe that we will get there this year, and that just takes time. So I think that a lot of these things, but like the sort of broad brush of this is, I think there needs to be this innovation in this, because we've talked about so many different subjects here. And it's fragmented everywhere. It's just absolutely fragmented everywhere. And I think that until there is some more conformity with certain policies and procedures, it's going to remain like this. And it's just so difficult. It provides difficulty for everybody. And it is people that have been in the industry for the 20 years that can then navigate their way through it because they've built up the trust, they've treaded the boards, they've got those relationships. And that, at the minute, is the way that that it makes it successful. But I still think that there needs to be some things that are addressed around those rules, the evidence levels, the university, what they can and can't say, what they can and can't ask for, because ultimately you've got the students at the other end. It's like going, I don't know. What that's why they go to the agent or their counsellor to go, what do I do? And the parents, what do I do here? And that's why the trusted agents, whether it's through an aggregator or whether it's a thing.
So John, I need to barge in again, and definitely we continue with on our podcast when you are in India, or probably another episode. Yeah. And if, John get to work with SIEC and Sonia, who to give a licensing fee for or two.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, because it's a very open discussion, and thank you everyone, because it's a Monday, I just realized it's a Monday afternoon for most of us. So before we wrap it up, if you allow me to wrap it up, and this is not just one way, questioning. So any one of you want to ask a question to me or to Shrikant, would love to answer, and if not, then probably, we can part ways and re-meet whenever we get a chance. Sonia, John, any question you want to ask to Shrikant or to me?
Well, my question to Shrikant is that, when you look, why do universities refuse to reissue an ECOA for a genuine student who's got a rejection, because the rejection letters are so generic? And I fail to understand. You are a government university, all of your government universities, those are the ones we work with. Your licenses are not going to be cancelled. What is the fear of reissuing a COA?
That's an excellent question, Sonia, and it's a multifaceted sort of answer there. But I'm going to say the number one factor here really is fear. And as much as the industry likes to believe that university is sitting in this privileged position compared to an agency, trust me, Sonia, we are actually not. We are marginally better placed than an agent, because there are audits, there are regulations, there are sort of industry university-wide acceptable visa grant rate. So if we are dropping below that grant rate, then we are in all sorts of trouble. And when I say we, it's actually the recruitment and marketing team. So the only people who get affected by this in a very significant manner is actually the people you are meeting on ground. No one's going to question the academic department. No one's going to question the operations department. The recruitment and marketing team and compliance team, which is usually under one person, one head, is questioned big time by the university management. And that fear drives a lot of those decisions. But equally important is the other aspect, where a visa refusal for X candidate, if you relodge the visa and get another refusal, you're actually increasing your weightage for the visa refusal. So you have not one but two visa refusals for one entry on the system, on the risk index. And that, I think, plays a significant part in why providers are hesitant to relodge, because again, these are the two key reasons, but I think somewhere in the background we all know and believe that if a visa officer has refused a visa, you know, it's hard for one to believe that government's going to swallow their own spit and say, oh, actually wrong decision, we'll review and revoke that decision, now you have a visa grant. So that kind of, you call it pessimism or you call it an assumption, also contributes to providers being, you know, hesitant in reissuing a COE. That's perhaps my view and our view. But most of the counterparts that I speak to have similar sentiments around that space, if that answers your question.
So we all functioning in an atmosphere of fear and
greed.
anxiety.
And greed.
And yes, but we still want volumes.
I mean, before we reach out to Ethiopia and an idle word, let's continue to do our bits, continue to get as many people visas, Sonia and John, and I'll continue to try to accommodate people happily, safely, and, assume or probably hope, one day, the government and the universities and the agents and all of us work in a tandem for the main thing to make a student success. And discussion like this is so relevant and so need of the hour. So thank you so much for each of your time, and that too on a Monday morning. And we need to do more of this. And because this is an unscripted discussion, but when I was going through all the research and question my team put in, and we all did last week, I'm so happy that most of the things been covered. So that's what we call in Australia decoded. This is what we call unscripted, relevant discussions. And now the most important thing, there are lots of content, there are lots of questions and solutions. But if it doesn't add a leg and go across and make right people listen to this, this is just probably a discussion among four of us, and it will be shame if such purely intent unscripted discussions are not spreading across. So to my audience, to each of you, if we can spread across, if you can put across a word that there are people who would like to talk and call spade a spade, and this content should travel across. Over to you, Shrikant.
Thank you very much, Saurabh, for beautifully co-hosting the second episode of Oz versus the world. In fact, it's actually called Oz.
Don't do that, Shrikant. I didn't. It's about Australia decode. It's not
Australia
about Oz
decoded.
versus the
So,
world.
yeah, we need to change that background then. But thank you very much, Sonia. Pleasure always to be hearing from you and connecting with you. It's an absolute pleasure and honor. And John, thank you very much for joining in. We've only met recently online, but appreciate all your input. And I'm sure the stars are aligned perfectly for you. With all these challenges, your product becomes all the more relevant in the market. So good luck to you with that.
Thank you, Shrikant, and thank you, Saurabh. I think all these discussions will continue, but I don't think there's going to be a utopia or a perfect world.
That way boring word. Thank guys. Thank you so much.